So if that's okay, I'd like to move over to agenda item 10, the monthly budget report, and invite Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones to tee us up on 10.1.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Hymas, members of the board, members of the public. This is the monthly budget report. We provide this both to the board and the public in accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Acts and the Money Management Acts, and just essentially for transparency that, and I attest to this, the Utah State Board of Education is able to meet all of its known and current obligations and commitments, making us fiduciarily sound. I am not aware of any other issues at this point. For your review, again, we've introduced this particular format, changing from the previous format of long pages where you could still do the drill down, but this is intended to be interactive, where if a board member and or a member of the public has a particular concern or wants to see what expenditures have been made in a particular program, for example, they can do so using this interactive or useful tool. If for some reason there's an issue with access, we'd ask or encourage you to contact me or my staff right away so that we can resolve that situation or provide direction on how to find particular elements or data within the monthly budget report. Chair Hymas, subject to any questions or concerns, this concludes the monthly budget report, and at your direction, I'll move to the discretionary funds report.
Please continue.
Moving to the discretionary funds report, and I always do this. This is the board's discretionary funds. Once again, we've done a really good job of ensuring acceptable and allowable uses of these funds that result from year-end close activities. You can see in the upper right-hand corner the remaining balances for particular fund or from particular fund sources as a result of last year's year-end close activities, state, federal mineral lease, land exchange, etc. If you scroll down to the main body of the report, this is a public-facing document. In the interest of transparency, again, both to board members and our accountability to the public, not to the government, to the public on how the board is, in this particular instance or from this particular fund, identifying projects that would benefit public education and use, again, of those funds in an allowable manner to support your directions and your strategic plan accordingly. Subject to any questions or concerns about remaining balances as depicted in the upper right-hand corner or ongoing projects and funds in the main body of this report, I can move to the next item, which is an action item for use of discretionary funds, which is, I think, 10.3. At your direction, sir.
Thank you. Seeing no lights, let's continue forward.
10.3 is an action item that we've put in or within this particular report. You can see there what the recommended action is. Chair, I just defer back to you for any direction or questions and concerns about the action as it relates specifically to the fund.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This is agenda item 10.3 as was stated, and we've got 4 board members who brought this forward, and we appreciate their work on this. We're going to turn over to Member Kelly.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that when allowable state funds become available, but no later than 60 days, we use $150,000 in our discretionary account to issue an RFP to retain accountants to determine, 1, how much federal funding is received by USBE for the past 3 years, and 2, the cost associated with administering those funds and the cost associated with complying with all federal contracts, directives, rules, and laws associated with those federal funds.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second from Member Brinton, and back to you, Member Kelly.
Yeah, Board Member Carey is kind of taking the lead on this, and appreciate Board Member Carey for doing that. This was an ask that we made in a previous board meeting. At that time, $75,000 was requested, and that was approved. What we found is when we sent that out to an RFP, that many of the accounting firms saw that as not being enough to even bid on it. So there were no bids that were put in on that RFP, and so this puts it in a range where we believe that accounting firms would put in and bid on this project.
Thank you, Member Kelly. We've got Vice Chair Wood, and then we'll go over to Member Davis.
I'd like to amend the motion by striking but no later than 60 days. And if there's a second, I'd like to speak to that.
Do we have a second? We have a second by Member Booth. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we have a bill that's outstanding right now by Representative Brooks that will require us to amend our website. And there's no fiscal note attached. They're saying that it will be zero amount, but after some research and a renewed fiscal note that the LAVAs would not put on there, it could be anywhere between 100,000 to 500,000. And so in order to comply, I'd like to be able to we only have 152,000 right now in our discretionary funds. So I would put obeying the law over a desired outcome for us here. So this allows us to still be in the queue if it passes, but allows us to obey the law if that law passes. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wood. Can I ask a question to Scott? Is that okay? And you just did a report on funds. Is there room for both? Is there room for all?
So Chair Hymas, can I seek clarification through you, sir?
Please.
So is the motion to prioritize then, is to prioritize that as funds become available, that we first go to meeting the website piece, and then, is it an and then? Or does it make sense what I'm asking through you or by you, Chair?
Yeah, it would be for me to prioritize what we are required by law to do,
Sure,
whatever that
okay.
is, and looking at what funds we have available to update our website to the manner that the good legislator is requiring of us.
Okay,
Thank you.
that helps. Yeah,
Thank
so it is feasible. I just want to make sure that it's clear through you, Chair, to the board, to the original motion, that would likely result in a longer timeline to get to the audit firm, and if the priority for or when funding becomes available to meet the legal requirements of that. I just want to make sure I'm tracking on that. That was for staff benefits, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Davis, is this to the amendment or to the original motion? Your light. To the original motion. Is there any other, seeing no other discussion on the amendment, Member Bogus?
So my consternation with this motion is to use the discretionary funds, we would have to bring a secondary motion before the board in a future meeting that would probably have to go through committee. So what,
Is this
I
to
just,
the
I don't fully
amendment,
understand the purpose of this motion, because we could override this motion in a future meeting.
I believe this is to the overall motion, not the amendment.
It's to the
your question-
amendment.
It is,
Yeah, I just don't understand why the amendment is necessary, because we can't use the discretionary funds for the purposes of that without another motion before the board. So I'm genuinely confused as to what's happening here.
I'm not sure how, go ahead.
Okay. So as I look at it, we're looking at in the next 2 months, we would be moving forward on this use as it comes available. And all I'm saying is that rather than me voting no on this, because I'm going to prioritize the funding using somewhere else, I was trying to make a kind of a midterm here, like let's get rid of the timing so that we can use it for other things. So otherwise I vote no, and so I was trying to find a good compromise there.
Vice Chair Hart.
So I just checked, and staff had submitted a new fiscal note for that, and for whatever reason, it was not updated on the system. The system still shows zero fiscal note, so that bill does require significant changes to our transparency, to our website, with an effect date of May 7th and $0, which we can absorb a lot, but we don't have in our back pocket a web designer. We have a lot of very talented staff, but not people that can design very elaborate websites. Just to report to the board, even when when it became first obvious what the bill sponsor meant by the bill, and wanted some interactive pieces on that website, we immediately started asking the people that designed the legislative website for some background and for some information about how much it would cost and what it would entail. Those meetings haven't happened yet, but we are actively working toward whether that bill passes or not. Whether, I don't know where we'll get the money, that's the problem, but we are working towards at least finding out what it would cost and what it would entail. So just wanted to give you that update. It does have a very quick effect date. Doesn't give us any lead time on it. We were hoping that the LFA or the bill sponsor would accept the revised fiscal note, but they chose not to. So we're in a pickle. We're absolutely in a pickle.
Thank you. Member Kelly.
Yeah, just a question to the maker of the motion. You've moved to strike but no later than 60 days. What time frame then would that put on this motion? What would cause us to not continue to move it back and at the bottom of the priority list?
Vice Chair Wood.
Well, I mean, right now, the timing would be when allowable state funds become available. So if we prioritize the legal requirements of the changing the website, that would prioritize before. So it would bump it down.
But to Member Kelly, if I can, Member Kelly, did you have a follow-up?
No, go ahead.
I just wonder, so technically, if any other legislative mandates came through, this would continue to get.
This motion could continue
This
to get
sure.
bumped, right?
That's what I'm understanding. Okay, Member Lear.
To Vice Chair Hart, just briefly, because some of us are contacting legislators about the issue that you just talked about. What is the fiscal note that our office determined?
Oh, what a great question. And I do believe that Mr. Uri is in the audience. The fiscal note for the revised fiscal note, I believe, we kept it, from what I understand, staff kept it very, very minimal. It was like 100,000, but because it would need, the work would need to be done after every single USBE meeting, the tagging and then the votes put with the agenda so that you can look at them, the follow along kind of feature, that would have to be done after every meeting. It would require FTE. I think it had an FTE piece and 100,000, but I could be wrong.
That's right.
Scott, did you have your light on?
Yes. Chair, $100,000 one time, half-time FTE sustained to support it.
So to clarify,
75,000 for the half-time FTE. Sorry, Chair.
I'm sorry, so to clarify
Thank
then,
you.
the 100,000 plus the 75, is that right?
Correct.
So 175.
100,000 one time,
Conservatively.
And then
ongoing.
0.5 ongoing. Thank you. That's
Okay.
helpful.
So, and Member Davis, I'm assuming this is still for the overall motion. So let's go back to the amendment here. The motion then is to strike but no later than 60 days from the motion. Let's go ahead and vote. And that passes 9 in favor, 6 in opposition. Those in opposition are Member Hall, Member Brenton, Member Kelly, Member Green, Member Carey, Member Bogus. Back to the underlying motion. Member Davis.
Yeah, I voted for this initially and supported it initially, just like I voted for the one we did in finance initially and looking at the waivers, federal waivers initially. That's been put on hold because the federal government Department of Education is in flux. This morning they announced that they want it disbanded this week or this month. I don't know. KSO could have reported that completely inaccurately. I don't know. But there's enough movement that it makes the last third of this motion a moving target. And I am not willing to spend the money in the moment unless we know in the next couple of months what is going to happen. If the contracts are already gone, we already know a bunch of those are gone, directives are going to go, rules are going to go, laws are going to go, then we need to get an idea of what we're paying for and what we're studying before we pay the money to study a moving target. It's all changed in the last month, in my opinion. 12
you.
hours, even more, yeah.
Member Carey.
Yeah, I think what Board Member Davis is actually supports this motion. I think it's irresponsible to receive these funds and not understand and know the cost that receiving those funds force upon this body. And we look at it and say, oh, it's free money. It's not free money. There's a cost of compliance with every dollar we receive from the federal government, and it is it's irresponsible not to know what those funds cost us. And we don't know. And so if the federal government says we're going to cut this program, we run the risk of making the mistake of saying, oh, well, we receive $1.5 million for that program. Look what it's costing us. But the reality is we're not losing $1.5 million because you have to deduct our cost of compliance from the amount we're receiving. And right now there is no one in this room or this building or apparently the state that can tell us what those costs are. And so, again, I think the wisdom of this is it allows us to plan, it allows us to prepare, and it allows us to impose a fiscal responsibility that we simply haven't had. And what's going to happen is there's some individuals who will run around saying, oh, look how much we've lost. Well, we don't know if we've lost that because we don't know what it cost us to receive that money. And that's all this motion does, is allow us to have transparency and to have fiscal responsibility to an extent that we have not had since I've been on the board. And if this information were readily available, the motion would be unnecessary. So I absolutely believe that the urgency is now because as these funds, and they may or may not, but to the extent they may, I think we would want to know as a body, what is it costing us? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll briefly, before we jump into additional lights, speak in favor of the motion as well. I think it is important to know what we're getting into. This is, for me, less about money, more about what is happening, what is said cost that's happening. So anyway, I see here's the lights that I have on here. I see that Scott, are you jumping in this conversation? Okay, so Scott will give us clarity on availability of funds, and then I've got Member Kelly, Member Earl, Member Davis, and Member Lear.
So related to Vice Chair Wood's motion, which I apologize I didn't know that we were making this motion. I would have advised though, so I'll advise now through you, Chair. If we could pull the report back up. Remember, you set aside $250,000 for contingency money. So you have the option of. I just want to make sure you know that's available in there, but it's committed towards contingencies as you define them, right? So if you would want to, prioritize the contingency fund now for legal requirements, now that we know what we know in the motion that was made, you can do that. I just want to make sure you know that it's available here. The reason why we didn't look at contingency for the other motion that was made by Board Member Carey is it just didn't, and maybe it does now, quite reach the level of contingency need, right? Or extra. We just want to make sure that you're aware of that. I go through these reports too fast. I should have slowed down and showed you in the main body that you have some flexibility with the fact that every year you set aside an amount for contingency. If you as the board feel that this meets the level of a contingency use of that particular 250,000, that might help. I hope I didn't confuse it more, but there is some flexibility there.
I
Thank you, Chair.
don't know if confusion is there, but just a follow-up to that comment.
Sure.
You're saying that regardless of the mandate that's coming from, or any other mandate that comes from legislators, this contingency could be used as part of this.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, at your direction.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's go to Member Kelly.
I just wanted to respond to Board Member Davis's comments. I appreciate her opinion and respect her opinion. But I would argue that this is exactly the reason why I think it's important to do this now, is because of all of this, all of what is happening. And I think to be in front of it rather than wait, to act instead of waiting to be acted upon. To have the information available to us to know how those federal funds are impacting the programs that we provide, and the cost of those, and how we can then act if indeed over the next month some of these things that are being rumored happen. I think we'll be more prepared to deal with those with the data that we receive from this audit. So.
Thank you, Member Kelly. Member Earl.
Yeah, I actually agree with Board Member Kelly on this, and I also think that there is long-term, we know in 4 years, we don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, we know in 4 years there's going to be uncertainty again, right? I think for us to have a knowledge of what costs were associated with something helps us inform risk moving forward, and this will take just a little bit of time to get this. So I think it's to that preparation kind of a thing that we're prepared for, any other changes coming forward, because once we accept that financial risk or time or whatever, we also need to know what the flexibility is in that, or whether we want to take the risk. But anyways.
Thank you. Member Davis.
Thank you. I think we need to be clear about what we already know. We already know the number of federal dollars that come into us. We already know the cost that we incur as a state agency to implement those programs, even down to the fraction of employees. For example, Dr. Voorhees has a fraction of her salary, am I correct, paid for by federal dollars, and a fraction paid for by different funds, because aligning to the amount of time that she spends. So we don't need to pay $175,000 or $150,000 to learn these things in 1 and 2. What we don't know, and this is the hardest part for these auditors, and this is what they're going to have to figure out if we move forward. It sounds like the will of the group is to move forward. But let's be clear of what we want. The only thing we don't know is the same thing we don't know about the state funds, and that is the regulatory burden. That is the time on the LEA end that it takes that could be not funded. We do know some pieces of that are funded and paid for with federal dollars, but what we don't know is, are there additional time that is required that's not funded with those same dollars? That's what we have to figure out. Is that a simple question? I don't know, because we haven't figured it out as a state level. If you look at our regulatory burden boxes on our state code, they all say there's no burden. And why are we having a task force? So I just want to be really clear. If we're moving forward with this, it's not to find out, we already know, number one, We already know number 2. What we don't know is the second part of number 2 is how the LEAs implement if there are time costs in addition to the monies provided. And all those things, the contracts, directives, rules, and laws, we can do a back study to say, we told you so, but moving forward, that's probably all going to change. I just want to make sure we're aware that of what we have and what we need and how we're going to get it and how it might be in flux moving forward.
I've got Member Lear and then Member Carey. I'd love to get to a vote pretty soon here. And Scott, you have your light on as well.
Just to add some background or clarity to this, when Board Member Carey approached me about this, yes, and I believe this is the same thing that Board Member Davis is saying. What we have all the direct costs, right? We have those labor costs, those hourly rates. It's the indirect costs that would take time for to measure and an auditor to do. So that's the additional reason. So I think she explained that well, and that goes to the history of behind this is staff don't really have the time to go in and do something that we could benefit from a third-party auditor on, if that helps.
Thank you. Member Lear.
I am not opposed to this motion if, and this is a big if it's a more holistic discussion. It's not just a matter to me or a difference to me of this is how much we're getting from the federal government, this is how much it costs us. It matters to me holistically who will serve those students with special needs, who will promote female athletes, who stands to protect what group, what regulatory body will be created at the state level to make sure that girls have an equal opportunity to participate as boys do? Who will make sure that the Title I schools have additional funding for the additional supports that Title I schools need? Those are schools that are predominantly in my district between Salt Lake and Granite. Who will make sure that those Title I schools are adequately funded? So to me, just comparing the cost of what federal supports or income, how does that compare to what it actually costs is not the discussion. It's who will stand up for the most vulnerable children and the schools that need us the most. It's not because I would look at this and say, we're only getting $1 million from the federal government. I'm making these numbers up, and we're paying out $1.2 million in terms of salaries. That doesn't address anything for me. And believe me, I will sick those special ed parents on all of us because we need to support those children. And who's to say what I've always heard about this same discussion that's come up many times over the years? What I've always heard is this federal government, and we all know it's in chaos right now, but is the federal government going to still require things of the states even though we don't get the federal funding? So that's another thing. So I would say I can't support this, and I don't believe in hijacking motions. So I'm not going to add the piece about the holistic discussion of what services do we still need for our children. But I believe that if we have this discussion, it has to include that. It's not just it's a real cost-benefit analysis, not a cost versus cost.
Thank you, Member Lear. We'll go to Member Carey, then to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would say that we can't have that discussion to what Board Member Lear was saying. We can't have that discussion in earnest until we know the money that we're dealing with, and hopefully that's the goal. We're not just looking at this to say these are the dollars coming in, these are the dollars going out, but I think knowing that information provides the basis for us to have those discussions. I would like to make a substitute, if it's possibly a friendly, if Board Member Kelly would consider it as such, but instead of saying but no later than 60 days, it would say but no later than 65 days. And then in our discretionary or contingency account.
So let me we've already passed to remove the 60 days. I see that we're changing it to 65 days. So I believe that's in order. And so the motion then is to amend this motion to add, but no later than 65 days, and adding contingency. Let's make sure that that's where it needs to be. Where would contingency
In
go?
our discretionary or contingency account.
Or contingency account. Does that, is that your motion there? Does that work?
Yes,
Do
thank
we have
you.
a second? Second, back to Member Carey, would you like to speak to that?
I asked the maker of the motion if that would be considered a friendly, and I'm not sure if it was presented that way, but procedurally, I don't know, one, if it's appropriate to do it that way, but if it is, I'd prefer to do it that way, but if not, we'll just make a formal motion.
The friendly would be without objection. Is there any objection on this? Yes, we have one, so let's go back to you to speak to the motion.
Yeah, Chair, I've already addressed my issues with that, but thank you.
Okay, so the motion then is to amend that the board add, but no later than 65 days, and adding or contingency. Let's, are we ready to vote? Hold on. So, I'm sorry, some clarifying question, go ahead, Vice Chair.
I just want to clarify, contingency is inside the discretionary. They're not two separate funds. The contingency is a line item within the discretionary fund.
Scott, can I ask you a question? I know you're in the middle of it, but you had mentioned, and I'm gonna wait for a second because this is relevant to the maker of the motion. Joe, when you're ready, I'm gonna ask a question that's gonna kind of be directed towards this whole thing. I want you to be able to respond if you need to. You had mentioned that the contingency is in the discretionary fund, but if the board determines this to be a contingency, how does one go about determining if we're not voting for it here? And I believe that's what the maker of the motion is trying to say is, let's put it to a vote. Is there a different process that we're missing, or is it just something that we can just do?
Chair, there's no like set code or things on what you as the board deem contingency worthy, right? What I interpret the motion to be is that if we can get other funds within 65 days, we use those funds. At the 66th day, then I would use 150,000 of the 250,000. Do I understand that motion correctly, Chair Hymas, as made by the esteemed board member?
Who's he talking about? So, Chair, I would be okay if this matter had to come back to this body to determine if there was a contingency. I understand what you're saying now, and I think you're right. I never intended for this motion to substitute a separate determination. I just want it, because I also understand the concerns about the website and the need to make sure those funds are there. It does sound, given the pool of money, that we could do both. But I think being fiscally prudent would say, let's come back and re-examine rather than put an automatic trigger into this. So I would defer to my response is it was never intended to be an automatic trigger on whether a contingency existed or not. Thank you.
Well, let's keep the motion as is then, because I think it provides clarity. It doesn't change anything on your end, Scott, as far as I understand, but it offers clarity to the public and to the board that after we are voting to move this forward or not, and if we do vote to move it forward, then if we don't have the money in just the general pool, then on day 66, then it will be pulled from contingency. Am I understanding that correctly? Scott, please.
Yes, and it would allow us to go ahead and, since we do have an identified funding source, we can announce the proposal or we could work on that over the next 60 days. because either way, we're going to make a decision on or have available funding. So
Thank
if
you.
that helps.
Member Booth?
Okay, so I totally support the idea that we need to be making our decisions based on as complete as possible information. I feel just an uneasiness in the pit of my stomach. We have these two important priorities, but we also have the USDB bridge money, $4 million that didn't come through, and I'm really worried about those kiddos and their needs. With what's happening today in Washington, we don't know what could possibly happen for our special ed kids. If it's just, well, we'll send you the money when? I mean, but in the meantime, we've got all of these educators that are trying to make it happen for every one of these special children. I just don't want to be, this is not business as usual because everything is kind of unknown. Not everything, but that was a definite over-exaggeration, but a lot, too much is unknown. And I just want us to be thoughtful and careful so that we are keeping ourselves in a position where we can meet what I consider to be the primary needs. And that would be the children and the teachers that have to teach and nurture those children every day in the classroom. So no matter what happens in Washington, no matter what happens with our studies, no matter what happens with the legislature, we have to be prepared to step up with a new way of funding, a new way of supporting the work that needs to be accomplished, and there's just a lot of unknowns. So I'm just at a loss, not knowing exactly what to do. I know we got to comply with the law, but the law could be different by today at 6 o'clock, and who knows. So thank you. That was very helpful, I'm sure. But
Thank you. Member Bogus?
So I think we're kind of in a hypothetical state, because even if this executive order comes down, Title I is codified, the ESSA is codified, and those don't go away with an executive order. Plans still have to be submitted to the federal government somewhere. An executive order cannot repeal acts, and so we've got some real hypothetical issues here that I don't know. I think we're in a space where we need to, actually, I'm going to go ahead and just call the question.
Perfect. The motion before the board is the call of question. Is there any objection? Okay. The new motion before the board is that we add but no later than 65 days in adding or contingency. Let's vote. You were closed out. Sorry. We've got 13 votes. We hit the close button. Let's reopen it. Well, we've got 15 here, and we should vote. Let's revote. Okay, that amendment passes with a vote of 9-6. Those in opposition being Member Reel, Member Bollinger, Member Booth, Member Lear, Member Davis, Member Wood. This brings us to the underlying motion as amended. And the motion is that the board direct staff, when allowable, state funds become available, use $150,000 in our discretionary or contingency account to use an RFP to retain accounts to determine, one, how much federal funding has been received. You know what? I do need to start over. This is updated. It's still it's right now. It's this screen, so I can't. I know. There we go. We're back. Okay. The motion is that the board direct staff, when allowable, state funds become available, but no later than 65 days, use $150,000 in our discretionary or contingency account to issue an RFP to retain accounts to determine, one, how much federal funding has been received by USBE for the past 3 years, and two, the costs associated with administering those funds and the costs associated with complying with all federal contracts, directives, rules, and laws associated with those federal funds. Member Lear.
Two thoughts, aside from what I ranted about earlier. One is last 3 years would have one COVID year in it, so it's going to be somewhat skewed. And secondly, I am concerned, I'm voting no on this issue, also because accountants are not, they'll tell you the amounts of money, and they're very strict and clear about their very narrow lane. They will not provide the background of what's lost, what are the philosophical elements that are attached to this money. So I just have to repeat just briefly that we have to consciously have that as part of this conversation, and I'm going to trust that all of you care about, as much about those vulnerable populations as I do, so that it won't just be an apples to apples of money to money. It will be a bigger philosophical discussion of what do we stand to lose.
Thank you. Member Davis.
Yeah, I have an amendment that this does not include ESSER money or any money associated with COVID, or we'll get a false picture of what the actual reality is.
There's a motion to amend. Second. To not include ESSER.
Any COVID-related funds, how about that?
Member Davis, you want to look at the screen and make sure that your motion is captured.
Yes, and if I get a second, I'll speak to it briefly.
You have a second. Go ahead.
We know roughly that our portion of our budget from the federal government hovers around 6%, I think, give or take a little bit each year. So we already kind of have a general idea, but that just got topsy-turvy when COVID hit, and it was all lopsided. So I think if we want a rational look of what we're doing moving forward, you know, it's not going to include ESSER funds or any COVID-related funds.
Thank you. Member Carey?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is something that we did discuss when we were looking at the time frame. And again, this isn't about distorting the income to USBE. This is really to look at, we got all this COVID money. What did it cost this body, meaning USBE? This does not extend beyond this body. It is not our LEAs. I actually think this is going to skew in our favor because it's going to show that we received all these federal funds, and at our level, there wasn't a huge cost of compliance associated with the distribution of those funds. That was, I believe, borne by the LEAs. So we did look at that. I thought it would be important to know, we got these COVID funds, what did it cost this body to comply? Based on the conversations that I've had, I don't think it was significant. So if it skews in anyone's favor, I think it's going to be in favor of, yes, that was effective in the sense that we didn't burn up a higher percentage administering those funds as they were distributed to the LEAs.
Thank you. Vice Chair Hart?
Yeah, in my estimation, I think that this is going to show that there are a lot of state functions that we do in education that we actually rely on the federal infrastructure, and that when the federal funds, if you were to take away federal funds, it's actually going to hamper our state funds, because when the federal government gives us a program or assigns us a program, they assign personnel and they assign indirect costs. And everybody knows that it's probably more generous than it should be, because that's just how the federal government rolls. So then I do believe, in looking at our org chart and looking at our people, that some of our federally funded people handle our state programs. So I think knowing that I get $58,000 for Title I. The people that I work with on my Title I funds also have some state responsibilities. So what's important also to know is if state funds were cut or federal funds were cut, it's going to impact our state operations. So that's just as valuable to know as the other way, or it's just good information to get. My whole problem is that we are going to get called up to rules on laws that are passed by our state legislature if we don't implement them. We have a finite amount of money, and that's at the top of my mind. This is great information. I think that we're going to get some information that we didn't expect to get, and I'm quite interested in it. But I also have a competing problem in that I know that state legislators are here and they want their bills implemented. So I think it is going to be interesting information. I think my point is that we all have suspicions on what this would uncover, and I think it is important information to know how to move forward. I simply have the same problem here as I do with my own budget when I have competing things that I need to pay for, and I don't know where those monies come from. And we are, to Member Bogus's point, this is speculative. We've got one more day in the session, and it isn't over till it's over. So I feel like we're 2 days early in kind of knowing what we have and knowing what we can do. I think we need to do all the things. I just know that we don't have money trees. So I think, yeah.
You have a microphone?
Or the main motion?
No, I'm talking about, well, okay, fair. You're
Well,
right.
I just want to make sure I know.
That was a very
what
nice
you're-
way to say I
because
wasn't speaking to the
I agree with what you're
motion.
saying, but it doesn't sound like what taking out COVID funds would give a more accurate picture.
COVID funds, I think that the system is it's very messy right now. And COVID-related funds, they're still there, they're still lingering, and it is going to be even more complicating. So, I don't know, I'm even more confused than I was before, so great.
Perfect.
Chair?
It sounds like it's time for a vote.
Out or leave it- Wait, I have one more.
Please.
I can make an amendment to this, but if we're going to spend the money to do the audit, at the very least, if they're going to audit all these COVID funds that are going away, that were one time only, it's not going to give us an accurate picture of what we need to do moving forward. So at the very least, I mean, I hope this passes so we get actually a clear picture of what we need to do moving forward. But if it doesn't, I hope at the very least then someone else will make a motion to say that the auditors must separate. So when the report comes out, we understand what they're looking at from COVID, which again, I think it'd be a waste of money because that's going away, but we at least have it separated. that money was COVID related. This money is what you're really looking at from here on out and what really impacted education the last few years or forever.
So you mentioned maybe a motion. Is this still what? Okay, Member Kelly.
Just ask if to clarify what that amendment would be, because that I think it would influence my vote, but I think it would be important, as you say, to line item that out so that we know how COVID funds did impact those budgets. So.
Well, we're on the motion before the board then is made by Member Davis to add that the assessment does not include any COVID-related funds. Let's vote.
Are still in the system.
All right, that motion fails. 10 in favor, or 5 in favor, 10 in opposition. Those in favor are Member Hart, Member Booth, Member Lear, Member Reel, and Member Davis. This brings us back to the underlying motion, and we'll go to Member Kelly.
Board Member Davis, I would entertain a friendly if you wanted to make another motion to line item that out, because I do think that is important to know.
Member Davis?
So, I mean, if that's friendly and people don't oppose, then I would say that any funds related to COVID are line itemed out and separated so that we get an accurate picture of what was COVID related, separate from what has been ongoing traditionally federal funds.
Can we get that in the form of a
Motion.
something? Yeah, something. You know what I mean? Something that we
Yes,
can.
the COVID funds and the report separates the COVID funds from the ongoing typical funds.
We call it one-time COVID funds.
They are one time. It's a waste of money to study them. We already
Right.
have all the
Which
studies on
of
COVID.
our staff
monies.
is keeping up with this?
Information on COVID.
Who's driving? Yeah, who's typed? There we go. And the reason I guess I'm asking who's driving. Member Davis, will you just keep an eye on this and make sure that this captures your intent?
Somebody else typing now. Now she's there. She's in the driver's seat.
Member Davis.
Yes, thank you.
Do we have a second on that? Member Bogus.
Yes, sir. So just kind of a point of order. We can move motions without objections, but there is really no such thing as a friendly amendment. And, yeah, but I would ask to vote on this. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion, and that is to add And 3, that the audit separates the costs of COVID-19 relief funds from ongoing monies. Let's vote. As the vote is being prepared, just one last reminder on the underlined verbiage on the screen here, we're amending to add and 3, that the audit separates the costs of COVID-19 relief funds from ongoing monies. Voting is open. That passes unanimously. Now back to the original motion. And let's scroll up a little bit and I'll read that for us. The motion then is that the board directs staff, when allowable state funds become available, but no later than 65 days, use $150,000 in our discretionary or contingency account to issue an RFP to retain accountants to determine 1, how much federal funding has been received by USBE for the past 3 years, and 2, the costs associated with administering those funds and the costs associated with complying with all federal contracts, directives, rules, and laws associated with those federal funds, and 3, that the audit separates the costs of COVID-19 relief funds from ongoing monies. Member Lear.
65 days from the day they become available, or from today, or what's the 65 days from?
I believe it would be from this vote.
Pardon me?
From this vote today.
From this vote, okay.
Is that from the
pretty
maker of the
soon.
motion? Okay.
Okay.
Member Davis, or sorry, Scott, you got a hand up?
Chair, if I may, staff recommendation, change the term accountants to auditors. That accountants is not quite as definitive as auditors, and that auditors would help address board member Lear's concerns, right? Auditors tend to have the skills to do like performance related reviews, where accountants are just, to her point, like strictly on the numbers. I know it's very picky, but it's an
okay.
auditing firm, so thank you.
So staff doesn't make motions, as you know, and you're
I
not
know.
saying to make a motion. So what I'm doing is I'm throwing this to the board, saying, is there anybody in this board who would like to make that motion? Member Lear. So the motion is that accountant be changed to auditors. Is there any objection to that motion? Okay. Thank you. That's going to be, so that's changed then. Member Davis.
Just out of all the debate, can someone just clarify, did we resolve that who decides if their funds are allowable and available? Do we decide that after the session? Is that what the decision was here after Representative Brooks' bill and the others things that we have to pay for get put out there? Is that what that means? Just want to make sure what we're voting on. We're
I
going to
believe
decide
so.
within 60 days what we're required to do legislatively. Is that what that means?
Scott, are you going to answer that?
Yeah, well, so my interpretation, because staff execute the direction of the board, is that at the 66th day, I would use 150,000 of the 200,000 towards the auditors, and that we would use the remaining balance towards the, assuming the law passes, towards the website development.
If we don't change it in the next.
If we don't
month.
change it, right.
Okay. The motion has been stated. Let's vote. That motion passes 13 in favor, 2 in opposition, those in opposition being Member Lear and Member Reel. And I believe that closes out agenda item number 10. Is that right? That's all the action item. Scott, anything else? Okay. Board members, here's where we are. Do we have lunch here? And we have a superintendent report that should take 15 minutes. How we feeling? We've got 15 minutes. Let's get this superintendent report done, and then we will break for lunch. Scott's raised his hands higher than I've ever seen. I'm sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
Sir, just checking on our understanding that at 12:30 is a time certain, is it not? For USDB, right?
We do have the USDB here at 12:30. Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Can we eat and work? I think we've all done it before. Yes. But
I'm certain, sir. Thank you.
it's not a time certain. Okay, we're in good shape. Let's keep moving forward then.